What, you know what? Just to be safe thing you did end up saving your later. Learned CPR and first aid. Had to give CPR to a family friend when she collapsed from a heart attack, and thankfully she was brought back after being down for 15 minutes. She only had minor memory problems and mostly just couldn't remember that day. She's still here and kicking. Years later, I used to get bored and study my mother's old, probably late 80s, early 90s first aid study guides from her lifeguarding years whenever I was bored. I could ace the practice tests with the pressure of being timed or pop quizzed. Even though some of it was outdated, it helped in 2013 when my neighbor had a stroke on her front porch and choked on the crackers she was eating. I'll never not have flashbacks to that whenever someone even mentions the word stroke. I immediately called an ambulance and got her airway cleared and in recovery position. She survived that one, but sadly passed about a year later from another. I hope to never have to use any of the official training I've been renewing every couple of years. It's nerve-wracking to go through even with the positive outcomes. Was delivering pizza in a sketchy block of town late at night. Huge apartment complex with multiple buildings. Walking up to the front door, I noticed a couple guys wearing dark clothing about 100 feet behind me walking in my direction. Delivery was on the second floor, and by the time I reached her door, I heard the main door of the apartment complex open and close. She used a CC for the order and tipped in cash, so when I was putting the receipt into my bag, where I kept my cash, I actually pulled the rest of the cash out and stuffed it into my inner jacket pocket just to be safe, leaving just the change I had that night in the bag. Started to head down the stairs back out to my car, and two guys jumped out from behind the stairs, and the one had a gun pointed at me and told me to give them the money. I quickly handed them my bag filled with quarters, and they took off towards the back entrance of the apartment complex. I never ran so fast in my life back to my car. I wanted to make sure I was as far away as possible before they realized they robbed me of $3.5 in quarters. I dropped my high school girlfriend off, then for some reason I locked the passenger door. Not 10 minutes later, I was stopped at a red light and some scummy-looking dude tried to open up the door. I have no idea why I locked that door after she got out. I really didn't have a habit of that. No idea what would have happened if that guy got in my truck. I was dropping my friend off at home. He lived in a sketchy neighborhood. I had my driver's side door locked, and as soon as he got out, I immediately locked the other one. These three girls come running out of the bushes, trying to open my car doors. One jumped on my hood and I ungunned it. She rolled off my car. The other chucked her drink at my driver's side door. I'm terrified to think about what they were going to do to me. Was on a side-by-side vehicle mudding on some property a friend and I were visiting. Mid-ride, I turn to my friend and say, "Hey, you should probably buckle your seatbelt, just in case." Not 1 minute later did he lose control and slide front first into a tree, going about as fast as this thing could go given the conditions. Both of us were okay, but the side-by-side was completely ruined. He looked at me right after, and his eyes were as big as dinner plates. My parents had a situation like this. It was before my parents were married. My dad was taking my mom home along a winding road, with an uphill on one side and a downhill into properties on the other. My dad never wore his seatbelt, but he had this feeling that he really should, so he put it on. A few minutes later, they got black ice, spun out, and crashed in a field down below. The owner of the property was really nice, gave them some food and water, and helped them contact my grandparents. They literally crashed like 5 minutes away from where my grandparents live and where my mom was still living at the time. It's been nearly 20 years, but they're still going great. My dad lost his glasses once. He was going to just use his old prescription, but last minute decided to just go to the optometrist anyway in case something changed. Turns out he had a tear in his retina and was booked for surgery within 24 hours. It was bad enough they said he probably would have gone blind really soon had they not caught it when then did. Last summer I started seeing random sparkles in my vision. They were rare and random. I asked my cousin, an optometrist, about it. He said it could just be harmless plasma, but if it keeps happening, to see an ophthalmologist ASAP, as it could be a tear in my retina. It started happening more often last December, which pushed me to book an appointment in January. The doctor checked both of my eyes and went to get another doctor to double check. I ended up having tears in both of my retinas. They don't know how it happened, but fixing them took about 15 minutes with a green laser right in the office and 15 minutes of recovery time. I just have to get them checked once per year to make sure they didn't reopen or new ones form. On the upside, I found out I have 20/20th vision. I was at a sleepover as a kid. I was a little worried because my mom had been oddly tired earlier that day. I went home early because I was worried. By the end of the night, I, 14 at the time, had to call an ambulance for my mom, as she was having problems with her heart and I was the only one there with her. She was incapable of forming coherent sentences and would probably not have gotten the help she needed if I wasn't there. So, good thing I was. My brother died of colon cancer at age 41 in 2016. His doctor strongly recommended that my surviving brother and I get colonoscopies as soon as we could. I admittedly took a while to get to it, but I had my first colonoscopy in 2019 at the age of 38. Thankfully, everything came back clear and the doctor recommended I come back in 5 years. My brother, on the other hand, stubbornly refuses to get it done. My mother constantly nags at him to get it done, and that's the best way to ensure that he won't. Just once a few months ago, I begged him to get the colonoscopy because I absolutely can't lose another brother. I told him this was the only time I would ask and I'd never bother him about it again. In just a couple weeks, our brother will have been gone for 7 years. My brother turns 50 in June. If, heaven forbid, he gets colon cancer, I'm going to be heartbroken and worried, but I'm also going to be pissed. Get your butts checked, folks. It might just literally save your... Not my, but I was getting ready for school whilst Mum was vomiting in the bathroom. She said it was just a stomach bug and to just go to school, but mentioned her arm hurt. Something didn't sit right, so I called the ambulance from downstairs. They arrived and took her into the ambulance. She then proceeded to have 3 cardiac arrests and needed defibrillated each time. A double bypass later, and she was up and about within a month. Paramedics told me she would have died 5 minutes after I left if I hadn't called. I went through almost the same scenario with my mom. We had just gotten home from a restaurant when she started vomiting uncontrollably. It was violent, to be honest. Seemed like too much too soon for food poisoning, so we called 911. She had a cardiac arrest on the ambulance's gurney while waiting for a room in the ER and was revived. I learned that day that heart attacks present differently in women than men. Snow chains at the bottom of the mountain. A bunch of cars passed me on a clear road on the way up with several warnings all the way up. I saw a local throwing on chains with no snow in the area. I decided to be safe and put them on. 30 minutes later, I was in one of the worst snow driving conditions I've ever seen. Whiteout conditions in a snowstorm that eventually resulted in the complete shutdown of the roads. I passed car crash after car crash with just enough traction to feel somewhat comfortable moving 15 miles an hour. Anyone heading to Tahoe needs chains, and chains that fit, don't around. I don't care if you have a 4-wheel drive. Driving through Tahoe and Mammoth during snowstorms is no joke. Literally sunny with no clouds to blinding white darkness in an hour. One more thing, if you find yourself near Heavenly and Siri sends you to a snowed over hill that feels too steep, turn around. Unless you have the right setup, you aren't gonna make it. Snow chains or not, you will slide. Just take the Harrah's gondola if it's that bad. If you don't already have your own gear, try another resort. Heavenly is uniquely bad for rentals and beginners in general. Had some weird achy symptoms and went to the doctor even though I figured I was probably overreacting. Turns out I had cancer. I had a friend who died of cancer aged 40. Whenever I feel embarrassed or that I'm overreacting about a possible issue, I imagine how much she would yell at me for not getting something checked out for a stupid reason. Please, people out there, if you ever feel silly about going to the doctor, remember that Jess would yell at you to get out there and get it looked at, because she doesn't want you to go through what she went through just because you were embarrassed. She wants you to live. One day I was attempting to make carioca for the first time, a kind of Filipino fried mochi, and after I popped them in the oil, I settled in and watched them carefully. I never wear an apron whilst cooking, but for some reason I figured why not this time, and as soon as I stepped out of range of the fryer, they all exploded. Turns out, carioca can form an impermeable shell when fried, so pressure built up inside until they popped and sprayed hot oil all over the kitchen. Of course, I was safely away reaching for an apron and was completely dumbfounded. Made sure to punch some holes in all subsequent batches. Of course, once I cleaned the kitchen, I ate them and they were delicious. 10/10 highly recommend. Normally, I'm pretty impressionable and cave to peer pressure, but this one time when I was younger, I was hanging with my friends and a couple of older high school guys I'd only met that day. The girls were all fawning over them, but I could tell they were idiots. When they all wanted to go for a drive with the guys, I thought, nah, I don't trust these guys and I think it's best I just call my parents and go home. I got a call the next morning from one of the girls who was passenger. One of the high school boys was driving. They'd had a serious crash and one of the girls wasn't wearing her seatbelt and hit her head on the dash and was in a coma for 6 months. She was in intensive care and rehabilitation for years. Still can't believe of all the days I decided not to go with the flow. It probably saved my life. Terribly sad about my friend. We were really close, but she never came right and her personality changed. I still wonder how successful she might have been and if we'd still be friends if that hadn't happened to her. Really sad. On a road trip with my siblings and dad in Latin America, he lived there and we were visiting. On a highway at night, with clouds, no moon and no lights, this was a new highway that nobody likes taking now, as criminals often leave glass or spikes to puncture tires and rob you, or worse. We were driving and this guy was pulled over and waving for help. My dad stopped behind and the guy was scared and asked if we could light up his car while he changed a flat tire. He was terrified of being out where alone and rightfully so. Dad goes to get out to help and my sister grabbed him and said she didn't think this felt right. Dad assured us it was fine and almost got out, but sister grabbed him again. Right then a car flew by the door right where he would have been. 4 guys jump out. One grabs the man, puts a gun to his head, and the others sprint to our car. There was a brief chase down the highway, but luckily their old Corolla didn't keep up with our Jeep, and they gave up after 2-3 minutes of driving 170 kilometers per hour. My sister saved my dad's life and probably ours by making him stay in the car that extra few seconds. The guy with a gun to his head lived and was okay given everything. After the chase, we had to turn around and continue on the way we were originally going, as there were no other routes to get back home, unless we backtracked 6 hours. After we passed the vehicle of the man, we saw he wasn't there anymore and we thought the worst. Luckily, we ended up passing 4 National Guard vehicles about 2 kilometers later and saw that the man was with them talking to them. To answer, I've never known if the guy was in on it. The timing has always seemed off to me. However, the look of fear in his face was so genuine when the guys jumped out that I can remember it perfectly 15 years later. The country in question is Venezuela. Leaving a spare set of keys at the pub that I live above. Went out on St. Patrick's Day and had my coat stolen. I keep my keys in my coat. At 3 in the morning, I had genuinely no idea how I would have been able to get home otherwise. Definitely not some big life-saving moment or anything, but it was a relief. I keep a spare car key at work. While I have never needed it at the end of my shift, there have been a couple of times that I have been in town. I live an hour outside for something else and managed to lock my keys in. It was the difference between a 10-minute cab ride or a city bus and a 2-hour cab ride. Might sound ridiculous, but many years ago when I did my mandatory community service was a thing in Germany as a counterpart to mandatory military service. There was a particular day in a pretty harsh winter. I usually went to work with my bike, as the streets were cleared of snow and ice anyway. At this day, I didn't take my helmet off because when I arrived at the place I worked, I immediately started to shovel snow and didn't even walk inside first. My workplace was a huge and old 4-story hostel in the woods. The roof was packed with snow and there were massive icicles hanging from the gutters. When a coworker asked me why I decided to look like an idiot with my helmet on, I jokingly replied it was for serious security reasons. A few moments later, an icicle block fell down and hit me on the head and the shoulders. The impact was so brutal that it made me fall down on my knees. Shoulders were bruised, but my head was fine. I really don't know what could have happened if I didn't wear my stupid bicycle helmet for fun that morning. Serious injury for sure. Lived in Baltimore at the time. Pulled up outside my place after getting off a late shift and had to get a backpack out of my trunk before going in. I noticed a group of teenaged kids hanging out on the corner and thought, nope. Called my roommate to come watch me walk to the door. About 10 minutes later, a girl comes running down the street bleeding, saying she got jumped by the group of kids for no reason. Stay alert out there, y'all. I was in Baltimore, supposed to be meeting a buddy. As I'm walking up the street, a group of 4 or 5 18-ish-year-old walking in the opposite direction saw me and turned and started walking at me. I saw a door to a strip club called Sherry's 5 feet away, so I went in. It worked. I didn't get jumped that day. First time I was ever in a strip club. Dancers were pregnant and had scars from bullet holes and stab wounds. Got the hell out, jumped in my car and never went back. Worked alone in a gambling, video poker place. Closing. Strange guy came in and started making small talk with me. I was expected to be kind and friendly to everybody who came in, so I was doing that. I decided to send a message to my boyfriend and a friend, and then something in me told me to take a picture of the guy as he moved closer to the counter I was behind. I snuck one real quick and sent it to said friend since she was awake. She called me immediately as she drove the 20 minutes to my job, an hour before I got off. I lied. I didn't drive, so I had no vehicle in the now abandoned parking lot, the only car being his, which was conveniently backed in right next to front door. 2 days later, there was a missing persons report released of someone who was a very familiar build and features that I have and suspected trafficking in the area. She went missing later that same night. He left after my friend showed up. I've never had such an uneasy feeling in my life, and I truly think sending those messages are what saved my life. He was waiting for me to get off work at a.m. Our hours were right on the front door. Not me, but a coworker was trying to separate some railroad ties with a crowbar as part of his yard work for the day, and when it popped, a nail flew and embedded itself in one of the lenses of his safety glasses he threw on because he had them for work. He keeps them on his desk as reminder. PPE is not just for the workplace, folks. I worked on a fishing boat in Alaska. I went to go pull the pin to release the net. Probably one of the more dangerous parts of the job. You trip and fall during that, and you will get ed out in the net and die. I wasn't wearing my glasses cause it was a 10-second job and I had just been eating food. Ran out there and my coworker yelled at me and threw me his safety glasses on his face. I popped them on, pulled the pin, it malfunctioned and the thing was overloaded with pressure. It popped up and smacked me so hard in the glasses it broke them and smashed the frames so hard into my face I had cuts around my eyes in the shape of glasses. It would have taken my eye out and I would have been ed out in the net and died a one-eyed pirate. It's a shame, really. One of our most common phrases on the boat was, "Did you see how I almost just died right there?" Saved the GPS location of my vehicle on Google Maps before exploring a national forest with a road trip buddy. We grabbed some fishing poles and head out towards the nearest water location on our map to hopefully catch a couple fish. Turns out it was a swamp, not a lake, and we got so incredibly turned around it could have ended very badly. We really didn't go that far in from where we parked, but somehow ended up on the other side of the swamp without realizing it. Drizzling rain, mosquitoes, bear tracks, and the sun started going down before we found the car. Without the GPS coordinates saved, it would have been a cold, wet night in the woods at a minimum, and more than likely a search and rescue required situation. Not my, but my mom's. She and I were home alone and I was getting ready to go to a party. I came upstairs and found her with the carbon monoxide detector in pieces on the coffee table. She said it was beeping, and apparently once years ago in our last house one was malfunctioning and giving a false alarm, so I guess she just assumed it was happening again. I shrugged it off and continued getting ready. I was about to leave, but something was nagging at me. She was insisting it was fine. After some arguing with her, I said, "No, we are calling the fire department." So I did. They came, and the levels of carbon monoxide were so high in the basement they said anyone sleeping down there would be dead already. Our cats were vomiting from the poisoning and we didn't realize. I guess the filter on the furnace was so clogged it was pumping out carbon monoxide. One of the firefighters pulled me aside and said if I hadn't called I likely would have come home to my mom dead in her bed. Driving along highway and get a bad feeling with drivers ahead of me tailgating back to back at 70 miles per hour. I switch lanes to be safe and get further clearance. Not 2 seconds later, one of the cars ahead slams on their brakes, looked like no reason, and the cars in my previous lane slam into each other, and one car that was behind me slams into all of them full blast. Cars go flying into the air Hollywood style, flipping up nearly vertical before slamming back down. I'd probably be dead or have a lifelong disability if I hadn't moved. Avoid dumb drivers, kids. Keep safe distances and buffers whenever possible. Had my boat trailer bearings repacked by the boat repair shop dealer before I went on a trip that I had to tow it for 400+ miles. I usually repack the bearings myself, but figured I'd have the pros do it since I had a long haul ahead of me. The day before I left, I decided to double check that. The bearing case was full of grease. Without it, they would overheat, and I'd be ed royally and stranded with a high risk of a wheel actually coming off the trailer if I didn't notice it in transit. There was no grease at all in the bearing case on any of the four wheels. I would have been lucky to make it 20 miles before something serious happened. Also, this has been a habit for decades. Pat my pocket to make sure my keys are in my pocket before closing the locked house door, my car door, etc. As a teenager, a friend of mine managed to lift a set of keys to a new car on a dealership lot. We were all super excited to go there that night and take that new car for a spin. At the last moment, I thought of how disappointed my mom would be and backed out. That night, during the joyride, they got into a high-speed chase with a couple of cop cars, took an intersection at 85 miles per hour against traffic, and were spun into a brick wall after an initial collision with a garbage truck. The driver was ed 17, and my two other friends suffered critical injuries and were hospitalized for weeks. No doubt in my mind that I would have been injured or ed as well. My friend and his wife were having their first child. They had gotten a big packet of information and paperwork to fill out before the due date to make things easier. There were also brochures for genetic testing and other things that could be done, and one of the things was about saving the cord blood. My friend said that he looked at the front of the brochure and his wife asked if they should do it. It is not cheap, a couple thousand to save it and a few hundred a year after that, and my friend said yes. Their daughter was born later that year. 3 years after her birth, they had a boy, and he was born with an immune disorder, no white cells, and his big sister's cord blood and stem cells were used as a treatment. When I lived at home, my room was right next to the bathroom, and when someone had to use it, I would always wake up because I'm a light sleeper. The hall has sensors for the light, and the click sound would usually wake me up, else the noise from the loud bathroom fan usually did the trick. I'm always a bit paranoid, and if I hear a sound or anything, my mind always jumps to the worst possible scenario. Anyway, this night I didn't hear anything, beside a bump, not like dropping something on the floor bump, but more like kicking the floor with your heel bump. I laid in bed thinking it was probably nothing, while my mind was going 100 miles per hour, thinking about all the scenarios that could have made the bump. I laid in bed for around 2 minutes, when I agreed upon myself that I wouldn't let the sound slide, even though there was dead silent after that. There were no fan noise coming from the bathroom, or no light in the hallway. I decided to leave my room and check just to be sure. The bathroom light and everything was off, but the door to the bathroom was halfway open. I opened the door all the way, and it turned it to be that the bump was my mom hitting the bathroom floor with her head, as one of her veins in her brain had popped and she had a brain hemorrhage. Doctors later told me that I was the reason she was still with us today, as it was a severe brain hemorrhage.